The stolen generation. The reason I chose this topic is because it's very interesting in history, since many children were forced to be removed from their family. It's important to acknowledge it and see what it has created today. This event wiped out the entire Aboriginal culture. Learning about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories, along with how the complete destruction of the Aboriginal culture happened, it allows you to develop respect for diversity and understanding of cultural difference. So what is the stolen generation? Well, the stolen generation started because of European settlers, which had severe and devastating impact on indigenous people. Their dispossession of the land and involvement in violent conflicts resulted in the death of a vast number of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities in Australia. This all took place from 1910 to 1990 under the past Australian government policies. The numerous government laws which harshly impacted on Indigenous people included separate education for Aboriginal children, town curfews, and laws that segregated Indigenous people into separate living areas. Now, causes of the stolen generation. So the British government and their descendants took over native land and removed the Indigenous people by cutting them from their food resources, and much more. The first Australian colony was Victoria, which was colonized by the Europeans and irrevocably changed the lives of many Aboriginal groups. Unfortunately, this opened the opportunity for the settlers to take over even more areas and maltreat more Aboriginal people by taking advantage of them, but also tearing individual families apart. The forced removal of Aboriginal children. It was a result of various government policies, and the generation of children removed under these policies, they became known as the stolen generation. The purpose of taking Indigenous children was to convert them to the Christian faith. They did that by making them forget where they came from and only speak English, but also only teach them to be white. With other words, they were abused and neglected. Aboriginal children who were brought up by white families faced identity problems when they reached adolescence. They did not know whether they were black nor white, and that resulted in identity crisis. Outcome in history. Most of the children for removal had mixed Indigenous and white ancestry. These children were targeted because it was believed that they would be easiest to assimilate into white history. Overall, the most important outcome was the loss of Aboriginal culture due to the assimilation into the white culture. Life as a member of the stolen generation was very hard. Especially because Aborigines were completely brainwashed to think only like a white person. And when they went to mix in with the white society, they found out that they were not accepted because they were Aboriginals. They were simply a lost generation of children. Now, Australia's apology to the stolen generation, which happened on 13th February 2008, by the Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, who made a formal apology to Australia's Indigenous peoples, particularly to the stolen generations, whose lives had been ruined by past government policies of forced children removal and Indigenous assimilation. Here is a very important part of the speech that goes like this. We reflect on their past mistreatment. We reflect in particular on the mistreatment of those who were stolen generations. This blemished chapter in our nation's history. This truly shows how sorry and disappointed Australia was of the past mistreatment of the Indigenous people in Australia, and they know that nothing can make up for the harm that they have caused the Aborigines, especially when there are very few of them left today. the impact of the stolen generation today. Today, there are obviously a very few Aborigines left, though this event of the past mistreatment of the Indigenous people was an eye opener to the world that the way the white settlers treated them was unacceptable, which today has led to equal rights between all races in most countries in the world, and it even inspired to create awareness of the colored people. So similar incidents today. Similar incidents still happens today, such as forced prostitution, labor, criminality, marriage, or organ removal in poor countries. Some of these incidents happen because of external circumstances that push people into taking very risky decisions in search of better opportunities to provide for their families. Or they're just simply pushed into jobs in exploitative conditions. To finally wrap this up, I want to read aloud a quote from Martin Luther King. I have a dream that one day, right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. What Martin Luther King wished for was peace between white and black people, and that someday they would become friends instead of segregated. Even though this speech says Alabama, we can create awareness that segregation between colored people and the discrimination against them still exist in some areas. But with this quote, we may end this, especially because I felt this quote touched me.